My name is Anastasia Boden, and I'm a senior attorney at the Pacific Legal Foundation. I want to meet Chef Andrew Gruel because he thinks the government should get out of our diets, and I think the government should get out of everything. So we're going to sit down here today in Palm Springs and talk about the social significance of food, crazy government laws related to food, and he's going to teach me how to fillet a fish. Chef, thank you so much for being here in beautiful Palm Springs to talk about something everyone loves, food, and something more people should love, which is liberty and the Constitution. I wanted to start, before we get into anything divisive, by talking about something that I think really brings people together, and that's food. It has a huge role in our society. And of course, being a constitutional attorney, I think about the Supreme Court and how they eat together after every vote, after every conference.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's a tradition that Sandra Day O'Connor brought back in because she thought it's really hard to stay angry at somebody if you're breaking bread with them and looking them in the eye.
I couldn't agree more. I absolutely love that. I say my whole platform is food is the great unifier.
Yeah. Do you think it gives you a special tool to finding common ground with people that you otherwise would not have common ground?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's tangible, right? So it's a literal tool to the mouth that we can share. And that in and of itself, which is visceral, breaks down a lot of those kind of like known and unknown emotional barriers. But also what's really cool about food, and I've noticed is that you can take any issue, right? Any topic that's typically confusing, whether it's supply chain, economy, law, anything. And if you use food as the vehicle through which you explain those issues, people suddenly get it because everybody knows food. So if you start from that common denominator, food really does act as the kind of the glue through which we can bring people together. But furthermore, when you use food, it's so communal that I think you can also ratchet down some of the crazy rhetoric that prevents people from hearing other people's opinions or viewpoints, et cetera.
Yeah, and I think it was just, coincidentally, you were telling me before how it even brought you, a diehard Yankees fan, together with a Red Sox player, right?
Yeah, yeah.
So that's pretty powerful.
Definitely. It is. That's it. And as I was telling you to finish that story is that when I was cooking, nobody in Boston at the time, and the Yankees were playing the Red Sox, nobody wanted to cook for the Yankees. So for me, food was also a career enhancer.
Yeah, right. I wonder if speaking out on, public issues and politics in this day and age, do you think has it jeopardized any other media opportunities or enhanced it, or is there any relationship between the two?
There is a relationship. So I always kept my politics kind of quiet. I talked about things from a very high level. I didn't insert much subjectivity to it. It was like, hey, here's what's happening. Here's why these things are happening. Then when the pandemic hit, I kind of was like, threw caution to the wind, was like, I'm done with this. I'm going to speak with a lot more fire. And I did. I got like totally canceled. I got dropped from everything at that point. So like any of my TV stuff, I was on boards of various industry boards, et cetera. I got dropped 100% from everything for speaking out, which only motivated me more. And then once I was thrust into the public light from that perspective and was no longer just the cook, the dump and stir guy, it was like, okay, well, you know what? Game on. And it was pretty refreshing. But definitely came with a lot of bows and arrows.
Yeah, I feel like, as being a libertarian lawyer, it's like constantly being on the defense, trying to phrase things in ways that people will not just kick you out of their house for. And one of the ways that really works, I think, is through telling the stories of our clients. And we try to choose cases. We're public interest lawyers. We're trying to get the law changed in the way that we think that it should be, and that actually represents what the Constitution says. And so we have to be really careful about case selection. And one of the things that I end up doing a lot of is actually challenging crazy food laws. Yeah. And I know you have some thoughts on that too, so I thought we could trade stories. So I'll give you an example. One of my clients was an artisanal butter maker in Ohio. It was a family-owned company. They'd been hand-churning butter for years. They had been selling butter in Wisconsin, butter mecca. But Wisconsin has a law that if you want to sell butter there, you have to first have your butter graded by a bureaucrat on a pleasing scale. So a bureaucrat will taste your butter and then decide if it's unpleasing or all the way up to most pleasing, highly pleasing. And he didn't want to do that. I mean, not only is it expensive, you have to label your butter according to these standards that someone else has chosen, but also he has artisanal butter that it's not meant to taste like And no shade, it's just not meant to taste like Land O'Lakes.
Yeah.
That's its own thing, you know?
Yep.
And so it's not really fair to impose those standards on him. And so that to me is just one of the craziest food laws I've ever heard. I wonder, can you top that?
I mean, I actually hadn't even heard of that one, but thank you for that, because I'm going to retell that story. That's unbelievable. But I mean, that just goes to show that, especially when it comes to food, that they try and insert a lot of subjectivity that supersede law, and any level of like commonality there. That's wild. I mean, for me, it's always the cheese trade, right? Like, I'm a cheesehead, and the underground cheese trade, I learned about it. It was almost kind of reverse, right? I'm like, why is there this black market cheese trade? Because people were pitching cheese on me, and they were like, well, you know, it's not like, you got to kind of be, and I don't want to call anybody out here. And I had done a lot of traveling through Europe and fell in love with all their cheeses because they use the raw milk that's unpasteurized. It's the raw milk that creates the bacteria that creates the flavor of like real French cheese, like a triple cream or an Epoisse cheese. And I realized that in the United States, cheese has to be pasteurized for, well, it has to be either aged, it has to be pasteurized milk or aged for 90 days. But that ruins everything, because that gets rid of all the flavor. So they created an underground cheese trade from Canada, French Canada, right? The French Canadians into the United States. And there's like an FBI, and there are feds like out to bust this ring, this black market cheese trade. Yeah.
Yeah, that's so interesting, because when this all was going down in Wisconsin, Kerrygold too didn't want to have to, you know, and Kerrygold would have to label all of its butter. So you can't really mark out just the Wisconsin bound butter. If you're going to sell it nationally, then you're basically abiding by Wisconsin standards for when you sell across the country. And so they threatened to stop selling in Wisconsin. And it started an underground Kerrygold butter train where people were stocking up with butter in Minnesota and carrying it over to Wisconsin because they knew it was going to be banned there.
Yeah. I mean, for me also, like, meat is another one that drives me crazy. It's easier to buy meat from like New Zealand or Australia in some states than it is the locally produced meat, because it has to go through a USDA approved facility, but there's only a few of those, right? So if I'm like a small cattle farmer and I want to slaughter my steer, I have to get it to a USDA approved facility. That takes a ton of time, money, and sometimes you can't even get it through. So that's why you have to sell it to one of the three big guys, right? It's almost like the government regulation creates this massive consolidation of this oligopoly at the top. But if you're importing meat, it just has to come from a country in which they have a similar framework of standards in their own country, and then you can circumvent the need to go through that USDA facility. So like New Zealand, right? Lamb. Oh yeah, sure, we have the same thing. And then they just send them like the paperwork, and they're like, this is what our standards are. Okay, fine, no problem. So I can import New Zealand or Australian meat, or any other country for that matter, but I can't get my own locally produced meat directly to the consumer.
It's perverse. And I think, you know, you're pointing to the fact that very often creates an oligopoly. And people talk about, oh, monopoly, these big corporations. Well, it's very often because of the regulation, you know, that wouldn't exist without the government getting involved. And I think that happens a lot with alcohol too. We've done a lot of alcohol work. So I have another example of a crazy law. There's two. One is you can't import spirits into New York direct to consumer unless your state offers reciprocity for New York distillers. And so we have a client in Los Angeles, really cool business. They do tastings. It's a small business, and they have visitors from New York who want to get, you know, spirits shipped back to New York, and they can't do it. And it's all protectionism. It's to protect the in-state people from competition. But another example would be bans on happy hour advertising. We had a lawsuit in Virginia where you could have happy hour, totally legal. Just couldn't talk about it.
Yes. Yeah, I remember that.
Don't use any creative terms, right? Don't entice people to your happy hour.
Yeah, I think that applies, or did, to there's various states, because we had restaurants in all these different states, and when we got our liquor license, I was like trying to learn. It was like learning a new language for each state to try and navigate what the rules and regulations were strictly on the marketing, which is so fascinating.
Right. Yeah. The labeling laws. And again, they can end up being pretty protectionist. In some states, craft brewers, well, they would say all beer cannot have attractive labeling. And they say it's because, well, we don't want to be enticing children to drink beer. But in reality, what was going on was, at the time when craft brewers were getting started, you know, labeling is one of the ways that craft brewers compete. It's the only, people go to the store and they see the pretty label, and that's sometimes how they pick beer. And, you know, the bigger companies didn't want that. They didn't want competition from smaller companies, and that was a way to keep them out.
Yeah. Well, I always point to that as the way in which a lot of the bigger companies are actually funding the regulation to keep the small guys out.
Yeah, I mean, it's usually cronyism if you even under the guise of protecting the public.
Certainly.
One other area I think of some overlap between our work is I know that you've been involved in charity work and particularly with feeding people. And we have a lawsuit right now because we have a client who was arrested for handing a homeless man a burrito. Ostensibly, they say it's because of food safety, which at bottom is saying that it's better that these people starve than, voluntarily accept food because they want it and they accept whatever risk comes with it. But I wonder if you've ran into any regulations in charity work or food protection.
Oh yeah. I mean, maybe I should say this. I mean, in that world, I'm much more of a ask for forgiveness, not permission type of guy, because I understand how bad it is. And the minute you start bringing it up and you get the local health departments and then ultimately the state health departments involved, like they're going to find a million reasons why you can't do A, B, and C when it comes to food. The overarching point that I'll make though is that their standards always change. So in the restaurant industry, things that I learned in, 1 year or 2 years always change the next 3 or 4 years. Oh, it turns out that wasn't good. So you're actually whether it's the ppm on the quat sanitizer, it's like, oh, that needs to be at 250. No, now it's down to 200. Somebody got sick because it was too high, right? It's always changing. So what I find really fascinating is that we're held to these really kind of hard rules that at the time we're told that you have to do this because you're keeping people safe, but they always change, right? So it's like, that it's not even the right rule because you're constantly changing moving the goalposts. So that's where I've said, I'm going to use my own agency to make these decisions for what's right. In California, we were very big in like kind of the green restaurant revolution, which was in the early 2000s, and trying to make sure that every single element of our restaurant was green by certain strict standards and then kind of my own subjective standards. And one of the things I was like, if you bring in Tupperware for your to-go container, like I'll give you a certain percentage off. We got crushed by the health department on that because in theory, you're bringing in a contaminated vessel into our kitchen and you could be contaminating everything, right? So that's totally fine. But the guy that's not good. But the guy bringing boxes in that like 30 cockroaches jumped on top of and started living in the corrugated cardboard from the dirty street to the restaurant, that's totally okay. So it's like, come on, like where's the logic on any of this risk analysis? Yeah,
that brings to mind two things. I mean, you talk about the goalposts always moving. That happened in the happy hour advertising case where they said we can't allow free advertising, free speech because people will die. I mean, they literally said that in the briefs. The briefs opened up with an unrelated car accident in a different state where the laws were totally different. And it said, look, this is what, if we allow happy hour advertising, this is what's going to happen. There'll be drunk driving and people will die. They said that. Meanwhile, they were actually lobbying the legislature to repeal the happy hour advertising laws to deprive us of a win, right? A First Amendment win on the books that would prevent them from doing any of this in the future. So, they're telling you people will die, but they know that's not true. And then later the rationale, they're just trying to repeal it themselves. So it's crazy. Has being on the inside of government given you any insight into how these laws come about?
Certainly. We talk about how crazy this sounds, and if we sat in the room with anybody, regardless of their politics, and explained to them some of these food laws and all the cases that you're going through, they're probably like, what? That makes absolutely no sense. And to the average, passerby, it doesn't make any sense. But now that I'm in government, especially on a city level, I understand now how these things come about. And it's just like the bureaucracy, right? Even a city council of 7 who all agree, like we're all in not in direct lockstep with one another. Everybody has like a different opinion, right? So you start kind of building, as I said, how the cliche goes, right? A donkey is a horse by committee. You start kind of like building these addendums and special interests. Like, well, my neighbor over here wants this, so let's just add this to the bill and let's add this to it and let's add this, right? So you get all this interest of people that you would think that when I got into government, I looked at it as I am supposed to be a representative of this entire city, right? And I know that the people who voted me in, well, they didn't actually, I was appointed, funny enough, but who voted in my predecessor, that he stood on certain platforms and I need to represent that platform. But even if it's a 60-40, which is kind of California, right? The 40% still needs to be represented. Otherwise, that's, that's why I say it's constitutional. We should focus on a constitutional republic in our vernacular and not democracy, because then the 40% would be in cages. So representing everybody, but not representing like a specific interest, like a donor's interest or my neighbor's interest. And I'm not saying that's what I see day in and day out, but just being in this, this kind of behemoth, this government behemoth, regardless of how big or small, they all operate in the same manner. When you look at it on a city level and then a county level, from the county supervisors into the state and then ultimately federal government and beyond, it's the same thing. It's just at a different scale. Right. And there's a lot of special interest in there, and they're motivated, right? At the end of the day, what motivates 90% of this is money. So it's like, okay, well, I want to do this and I need to represent this individual person's interest because he donates or he has a platform or they're very influential and they can do X, Y, and Z. And it's like, you're always thinking about the next race. You're thinking about the donors. You're thinking about, we need money to fight X, Y, and Z, or this culture war, or that culture war. The whole system is perverse. And I actually think in order for us to get to a better place, we need to take the whole thing and break it, maintain the Constitution, break the way in which we've circumvented, I think, what is inherent and explicit in the Constitution, and review the mechanics of how we represent the people.
Yeah, it's interesting when you're talking about democracy versus republic, because so many people get that wrong about our country, right? And I think it was Lincoln who said democracy is two wolves and a sheep voting on what's for dinner. Another food metaphor, as it were. But yeah, that comes up a lot when we're in court, because people want courts to defer to the legislature. They're like, why are courts getting involved? They should stay out of it. We have a legislature to make laws. Don't let courts. That is the entire point of courts in the Constitution, is to be a backstop on the legislature and to protect people's rights, that when their rights get trampled by the 60% or whatever.
Yep.
So it's like a fight that we're constantly having in the courts is, no. Remember, the Constitution exists for a reason. It's not democracy above all. That's not how any of this works.
Yeah. We've lost our ability to kind of like use the Constitution as a North Star. I think that now the word democracy and so much of this political jargon has been so washed out that like people don't even know what they're talking about. I'm not saying that as an insult. I mean, we genuinely don't know, because we are redefining words. We saw it through the pandemic explicitly, like with the literal redefinition of words, right? Vaccine, recession, I mean, just to name a couple, and ultimately democracy, in my opinion.
Emergency.
Yeah, well, there's that too. There's that.
Okay, I wanted to move on to some rapid fire food questions, quick hot takes. I know you're good at hot takes.
I'll try.
So let's see. Best cooking show on television.
Probably, that's a tough one. I mean, I go back to the old school cooking shows, right? Like the Dump and Stir, Julia Child, Jacques Pepin, Jan Can Cook, the PBS style cooking shows. That's what got me into food. I fell in love with food because I was sick one day and I got sucked into all these like daytime cooking shows, the old school ones. So then I started faking sick just to watch the cooking shows so that I could practice it and then clean it up before my mom got home. That was really the catalyst behind me getting into food and loving food.
Oh, that's great. I didn't know people faked sick. I'm gonna have to look out for my kids faking sick to watch cooking shows. Worst diet fad.
The cut out saturated fats, that one. Eat more seed oils, vegetable oils are good. Cholesterol's bad.
Another one of those things where it changes, right?
Yeah.
Depending. Yeah.
Yep.
The same thing that's considered terrible then is really understood to be the better thing later.
Yep.
Thoughts on veganism?
I don't have a problem with veganism. I joke about it a lot on social media just because of the behavior of vegans, but veganism itself, I don't have a problem with. We actually opened a vegan restaurant years ago called Butterleaf, and the idea was to bring plant eaters and meat eaters together so the food would be so crave-worthy and vegetable focused that you didn't even realize there wasn't meat in it. So not alternative meats like tofus and seitans and all these fake meats, Beyond Meats. It was just a celebration of vegetables. I think we're in an area now, going back to the first question about nutritional advice, where now it's like meat. Like everybody's like butter, which I love too, but we can't forget about vegetables. Like I absolutely love vegetables. I think there's a bounty of amazing, just the agriculture in the United States is on another level, and actually beyond too, right? Like Chile and Peru and Mexico. I mean, just we're very lucky to be able to access the vegetables that we do year round here in the United States. So we were celebrating that, thus the name Butterleaf, right? Which is also a lettuce. And I thought we created a pretty good concept, but we did not indulge in the vegan cult And that's ultimately why I think we didn't hit it big with that concept, because it was more about like a brand and an identity of being vegan, and we didn't indulge in that. And so we were just like, moderate.
Interesting.
Restaurant.
Well, everything in moderation except moderation.
Yeah.
And liberty. Okay. Most misunderstood ingredient, or perhaps underappreciated. Maybe that's a better.
Most underappreciated ingredient would be peppercorns. I think it's misused the most. It's just like salt and pepper. You got to put salt and pepper on it. And that most people don't realize that unless you're cracking it fresh, there's no reason to use it. So like pre-ground black pepper, you might as well just have like a stale cardboard. It's a fruit, like it's a dried kind of fruit berry. You want to freshly crack it. And there's hundreds of different types of peppercorns too. And all we know is the black peppercorn. So look into peppercorns.
Will do.
Yeah.
We're going to start a peppercorn revolution.
Wendy Peppercorn.
Can't argue with that. QED. Best way to get kids to eat vegetables.
Make them cook it themselves.
Very cool.
Kids will eat anything if they cook it themselves.
So true. If you cook it, they're actually, much less likely to eat it.
Exactly. Because they feel they have equity in it.
Yeah.
So they're like, oh, well, I made this. I'm going to eat it. Of course it's great. I made it.
How do you feel about, there's a big emphasis on protein right now in culture. Is that food myth? Is that reality? What are your thoughts on protein?
We need more protein. We need a lot more protein, good, healthy, high quality proteins. So proteins that are higher in your omega-3s, DHAs, right? So I think that there's a massive seafood deficiency in our diet in the United States. Our per capita consumption of seafood is like 17 or 18 pounds per person. Look at countries like Japan, Korea. I mean, they're in the 200s a year per person, per capita consumption. Coincidentally, they have the lowest rate of chronic disease and they live longer than us. So I think that there's a direct correlation there. We love seafood. We love fishermen. We love the romance around the sea and the ocean. And yet we never consume seafood. It's almost like we're so scared and confused about it. It's like, well, I'll have the chicken. So I think that that's the thing, because it's those healthy omega-3s, those healthy fats that we need more of in our diet, because 6 of the 8 leading causes of death in the US can be alleviated through a much more regular consumption of these healthy fats, primarily found in seafood. 1 of the 8 is actually car accidents. So it might make you a better driver too.
I'm a great driver. Oh, I was thinking about, you said earlier, I was talking about butter and then you were talking about cheese, and it's like, it's always dairy. Interesting. It's always dairy at the Supreme Court where there's these big fights over regulation in food. Dairy is, it gets heated. But fishermen too, we have a lot of lawsuits on behalf of fishermen. And one of the greatest Supreme Courts in recent history was on behalf of fishermen who just wanted to earn a living, but were being stifled by crazy regulation. Okay. Dream dinner guest, living or dead?
Dream guest dead would be any of my relatives, right? Grandparents, etc. Apparently there were chefs on my side of the family. I never got to meet them, but obviously both grandparents, etc. That'd be cool to cook for like my parents' parents, I think that'd be fun.
Yeah. Favorite Supreme Court justice? Do you have one?
Scalia.
Classic.
Like, just, it kind of doesn't need to be explained.
Yeah. It's a good one. Thoughts on the Constitution? Are you pro?
Yeah, I mean, I'm pro Constitution. I have some issues with some rulings though that have, I think, distorted the Constitution. McCulloch versus Maryland being one of them. I'm not a huge Hamiltonian.
Hot take.
But yeah, I guess so. I think that there's so many things that are implied or reinterpreted in the Constitution that have led towards some of the confusion and the travesties with government that have come out of it. So, I mean, could they have not just been a little bit more detailed? No, I'm just kidding.
Well, yeah, they could have. At the very end, they could have written, "and we mean it." I think that would have solved all of our problems. But don't worry, we're working on restoring the Constitution back to what it really means. So I'm working on that.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Okay. And I'll cook along the way.
Perfect. And if you get regulated, just call me up.
I definitely will.
We represent everyone for free. Okay. Now I wanted to turn to something else that I think, we have in common, which is living in California. Has it become unlivable? And if so, why do we still live here?
It's a great question. So it's one that people ask me on X every single day. Why are you still there if you complain so much? And I always make sure I tell them, if you see me complain, there will always be a suggested solution. So that's the key. And sometimes it's hard to remind myself to do that. But California is not unlivable yet, although parts of California are unlivable. And frankly, I think parts of California are gone. Like they're done. They're not coming back. Like we harp on San Francisco, Los Angeles. I think they're done. Like I just don't think that Los Angeles or San Francisco is going to have a moment for at least 40 or 50 years. I think it's just going to be on the decline because there's a latent, right? Like a latent effect to a lot of the policy that we've seen in California. 15, 16 years of like one party rule, galvanized through this super majority, and they've legislated their way into even more power. I like to use PAGA as the kind of example. As an employee, you can create any fake lawsuit and you're going to win no matter what. That's really what it is. I mean, we can get into the granular detail, but I can go as an employee into any business and say, and quit and then file a fake lawsuit with a form filing, and the business owner has to fork over a couple $100,000.
Yep.
75% goes to the state. I think like 20% goes to the trial attorneys and 5% maybe goes to the plaintiff or the class. And you cannot win PAGA. Now, the funny thing is they just recently reformed PAGA. I was like banging the drum on that for years, and they recently reformed PAGA. The reason they did so, people won't talk about this, because Newsom got hit. Plumpjack Winery, he got hit with a PAGA suit. Suddenly he wanted to reform it. Scott Wiener just is now trying to re-legislate and put back into law the things that were reformed out of PAGA. You see, so what they do is that they create these insane laws where they control you and take all of your money, and they give it to the state. They don't even give it to the person they claim that they're protecting. And then they will just take more and more power, but they'll do that in every single aspect of your business and ultimately your life. And so with that little formula, if that doesn't stop, then California's done. Like if they don't stop operating through that lens and with that playbook, California is done.
It's so funny that you should bring up PAGA, because I was going to ask you about something related that I think has been weaponized through PAGA, which is Prop 69. These are the warnings, may cause cancer, which now they slap on everything because people are so afraid of being sued for not having a label. So now you see, you walk into Starbucks and there will be a coffee may cause cancer. If you are in a parking garage, there's a Prop 69 warning. Christmas lights, chips, all of these examples of people just slapping the warning on everything, which of course reduces the warning's value because now it's on everything, because of fear of being sued over it. And it's a uniquely California thing, right?
And how bulletproof is it really, right? Like, because we all know that regardless of, I've had the tightest agreements and contracts, and when I take them to attorney, I'm like, I'm good, right? And they're like, well, they can sue you for anything. And theoretically, and suddenly that theoretically turns into, oh shoot, why am I $90,000 in legal fees, right? Like for me, I look at California is the ambulance chaser attorney. Like we've become the ambulance chaser state by proxy, and that's how they legislate. And that needs to change.
Yeah. One reason why I remain optimistic about California, like you were saying, like we're not there yet and we can turn it around, is because when you look at the history of recent propositions, actually, there have been a lot of good ones, right? Like allowing granny flats or accessory dwelling units, not passing new rent control, defeating new rent control ordinances, things like deciding not to take Prop 209 off the books. Prop 209 eliminated racial preferences in government contracting, government employment, government education, etc. And then, of course, in recent years, they tried to take that off the books so that they could discriminate in the name of anti-discrimination. And then California voters said, no, we want that on the books. And so it's so interesting. California has this terrible reputation, but recent propositions show that people are not as far gone as the reputation would suggest. And I think that says something about the voices of California are not being represented at the legislature.
Exactly.
But I think, if it were reflected through our laws, we would be in a better place.
Yeah, if you use the propositions as a barometer for like whether we're how far gone we are, you are correct. Like we're not as far gone as some would suggest. But then when you watch the way they fizzle out in Sacramento, then you got to ask yourself, like, where's the power here, right? Prop 36, that it's not even going to be funded. It's we passed it, but sorry, there's no money. And that's the thing about California is at the end of the day, I look at everything as a business, and only because that's what I know. And I'm not trying to dehumanize it, but there's going to be a financial break point with California. And there's only so long that we can kind of, milk the federal government before we get cut off, which we're starting to see right now. So at what point do we hit that financial break point where the people kind of rise up and say like, no more?
Yeah, hopefully soon. Thoughts on the boondoggle, the high-speed bullet train? Do we just drop it at this point? What should we do there, do you think?
Yeah, cut the losses. I think somebody's got to go to jail.
Yeah.
I mean, because there is no way that we spent that much money without somebody pocketing it. Like, and if it's just pure ineptitude and part of the ineptocracy, then somebody still needs to go to jail. Like, I know legally you can't go to jail for stupidity, although I think there's some, we can connect some dots there. I just don't buy the fact that we spent $16 billion, 15 years, not a single track of rail laid, and we're asking for another potential $100 billion. Like, it is the most offensive thing ever.
Start the audit.
Yeah. I mean, whatever you've got to do. But like, we all know how government works, right? Like, I see it like, okay, well, this person got this contract and then they ran a play on us and they did, $10 or $15 million of consulting work only to put out like a 5-page paper that says, water's wet. And then their brother, who has another consulting firm, another 100 million, you start adding that up pretty quickly. And there's a lot of papers and feasibility analysis telling us what we already knew.
That reminds me of a Supreme Court case this term where the issue was some, wonky, nerdy constitution, or it wasn't even constitutional. It's like a statutory thing about fraud and what have you. But the facts of the case were so interesting, which is there's a federal contracting program. You have to use a disadvantaged business. And so in order to satisfy that requirement, there was a contractor who won the bid, promised to use a disadvantaged business, but what that contractor really did was use its, as a subcontractor, the company it really wanted to, its friend, I think they were friends, and so it bought all the paint from its friend, and then it hired a pass-through disadvantaged business to satisfy the requirement. And what that business did was it actually ordered the paint and then sent it to the original buyer, but it jacked up the price a certain percentage to satisfy the requirement. It was all a grift, and it just drives up the price to all the taxpayers without actually accomplishing anything. I'm
surprised that even went to court, because to me that seems like modus operandum. That's the play.
Yeah. Is that even illegal?
Actually, like, that's really where my mind goes. I've become so immune to these things. Like, that's just commonplace. That's government. That's how you end up with, anything in government. Look at, like, when you look at all the money they spent from the transportation in California for Caltrans, it was like $200,000 for a boardroom table, $10,000 for a bed, for workers to sleep in, but like multiple beds at $10,000 per pop. Like, it's crazy. It's crazy. And that's what, I see, like I said, I see it on a city level. We just balanced our budget, and we have a budget that's, going to be approaching upwards of, be $1 billion soon in a city in California. And when you get into it, right, and we have business-minded council people right now, and we get into it, and we went through and go through line item by line item, and it's like the things you find. And in many cases, these are things that have just been built in and have compounded over time from somebody 25 years ago in the city or 15 years ago, and it was a deal, and then it's just like goes up with CPI, and it's already, you're like, who did this originally? And you start to peel all the layers back. And obviously that's what Elon was doing with Doge. But then nothing happens, right? Like, the bureaucracy is so stitched in that the bureaucracy is really, making decisions about itself.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's really hard. As you were saying, there's so much inertia. And it's really, once things are on the books, it's really hard to pare them back. And it's funny because in California, we actually have on paper a pretty good sunset law that the legislature is supposed to reconsider certain laws after so many years to consider repealing them. And that's a vital protection that a lot of states have considered passing to get laws off the books. The funny thing is almost nothing ever comes off, right? It's very pro forma. It's like, yeah, we looked at it and we decided, let's keep it on.
Yeah.
And so that's why, unfortunately, things change and yet they stay the same.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, let me ask you really quickly, not to flip the mic on you, but you said you're optimistic by virtue of the props. I appreciate that approach. But like, generally speaking, California, like how do you feel?
Yeah, I'm optimistic because I think the read on California was the way that it was because too many people were afraid to express how they really felt. And I think we're seeing a change and a little bit more of a culture where people feel emboldened to say their true views. And those true views are actually very different than what we all thought California craziness was. Yeah. And so, I think if you can sit down, break bread with someone and actually listen to them and they listen to you, you'll find that we have a lot more in common than differences, and that people feel positive about individual liberty, entrepreneurship, small businesses, and all these things that can make this country great. Housing. There's a lot more common ground than we thought.
So then why aren't people voting for it? Is it manipulation? Is it propaganda? Or is it just indifference?
One thing is maybe we don't have all that many choices, right?
Yeah.
We don't have people running on those platforms.
Good point.
And even when you do elect people, once people get into power, sometimes they tend not to do the right thing. They suffer from the same institutional pressures and lobbying and whatever, even if they came there to change things.
Could term limits ever be a reality or no?
I think so. Well,
like legally?
Yeah, I think so. And that would probably be for the better, right? And I think it was P.J. O'Rourke who said, I don't want a politician who loves his job. I want a politician, politicians should hate their job because they're signaling something wrong if they're going in there and they're like, I'm going to change the world and make everything better. That's a problem. Just leave us alone.
I agree. Well, it's funny because I came into city council, the mayor at city councilman went on to a Senate seat. So they appointed me into city council, right? So I came at it from the outside and I was thinking through that lens of okay, I'm coming into this and everybody's like, we can't have term limits because we need people to understand how all of this works. And I come into it with this kind of very one-on-one approach, onboarding approach, or it's open mind. I want to know everybody's philosophy, everybody's perspective. But then the people who have been there for a while, not necessarily city council, but also other city councils came to be look out for this and this and this and this and all this stuff. And I'm like, wait, I want to come at this clean, right? And I realized if everyone's coming at it clean like I did every few years, you actually have a pretty open mindset where you're not being told look out for this landmine. This person is bad. This is bad. You need to sign this. You need to do this. And the idea is that, it's going to slow things down. That's what I want. Yeah. Somebody asked me, what are you going to do? What's your goal? And I said, to do nothing. They're like, that sounds horrible. I
Calvin
said, no,
Coolidge.
I really want to slow down the pace, right? I will remove barriers so that private industry can move forward and that the people can do more. But from a government perspective, that's it. That's my role. I don't want to do much. I'm not here to dictate anything.
Yeah. Fewer laws, not more.
Yeah.
The last thing I wanted to ask you about was something I was really surprised when I was going through your Twitter feed about that you had paid attention to, because I thought it was just something some of us dorky constitutional law nerds had seen, which is that the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals recently struck down a California locality's ban on yoga in the public. And I wanted to know your thoughts on this.
I mean, it's huge. I just find it almost farcical that it had to get to that point. That's for me is just some of the insanity. But that goes, that fitness falls into the crazy food laws. It's the same thing. But, it's just another example of the overreach because of politics and, really weaponizing the government. And we see that all over the place in California. Yoga moms, food moms, now schools. I mean, especially charter schools, home schools, AB 84, all that stuff.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. And for me, it was very gratifying to see. It's crazy that it got to be a lawsuit, but it's great that it actually got a judicial opinion, because what we see in my practice a lot is we sue and they'll try to pick off your plaintiff. They'll say, well, we won't enforce the law against you, or, they'll find reasons to kick you out of court, or they'll repeal the ordinance before you can get a decision that stops them from doing it again. And so as crazy as it is that opinion is on the books, it's kind of a triumph of litigation, and a good thing that sets a broader precedent about First Amendment protections and limits on government.
Yeah, that is good. I think the pendulum is swinging in a certain direction, albeit slowly, especially in regards to a lot of the laws. And in California, they're waking up a little bit.
You're optimistic too?
Yeah, no, I have optimism, but I was curious as to your optimism, because I'm like, is there more optimism that I can add to my optimism? So I'm going to steal some of yours.
There's endless optimism. I call myself Anastasia, like Pollyanna, but Anastasia.
Yeah.
Because, well, it's a nicer way to live anyway. And the arc of history does bend towards justice if you just look at it. So I have to believe. On that positive note, thank you so much for doing this interview. It's been great. There's so much commonality there. and let's go fillet a fish.
All right, let's do this.
All right, chef, where do we start here?
So one way we can do this, right, is you can actually just cut right down the back. So I'm just running the knife straight through on the bone of the back right there, and then just like literally fillet it off. So we got one fillet right there.
You make it look so easy.
So got another fillet right there. So I showed you the one easy way, which is just kind of pulling the fillet from the back. Now this is the more traditional way, right? So I'll have you do this one. I just want to show you the composition, right? So you got the backbone right there in the middle, okay? So you're basically gonna cut down the backbone.
Okay, like this?
Yep, just use your weight to hold the fish. Yeah, there you go.
I chose the wrong career.
Put that hand here, there, and then pull. Yep, there you go.
Oh, look at that.
Let me just stop there.
Okay.
Just kind of peel it off. Look at that. That is beautiful. See how much cleaner that way? Your fillet is better than mine.
Really child over here.
So, that's it. That's perfect.
Well, number one down.
All right.
Thanks
good
for
job.
the lesson,
Good job.
chef.
I'll give you
How much do I owe
the
you?
old fist bump.